Tuesday seminar, which is now this webinar form. So we are today presenting a publication and discussing it. The book is Social Distinctions in Contemporary Russia, Waiting for the Middle Class, published by Routledge. And we have here two editors of the book, Jouko Nikula and Mikhail Chernysh, and two of the other authors. In spite of it is concentrating much on middle class, we have not chosen to talk about middle class, but more generally maybe on the social distinctions, social change in Russia and the results of the publication. What is special I would say in this book is that there is quite strong empirical data which is collected in 4 years, in fact, during 20 years, no, more than 20 years. Maybe the first time was quite preliminary and mostly it's reported by the 3 different times. And this history is quite long, and I would think that it is much. We have to thank Raimo Blom from Tampere University, Harry Melin, and of course Markku Kivinen, then who was working with them. And okay, but Jouko will tell some words about this history, maybe also about the book. But who is Jouko Nikula? Jouko Nikula, you will not see Jouko Nikula today. He is talking, but his video is not there.
Yeah, I'm here.
Yeah, he is here. And Jouko Nikula's research interests include the working class and trade unions in the Baltic countries and Russia, and the evolution of entrepreneurship in post-socialist countries. I have been working with Jouko and in another issue, Rural Studies, and Jouko was co-editor in numerous books, I could say, a real professional co-editor. But I want to mention here a classical study from 2001 with Ilkka Alanen and others, decollectivization, destructuration, and disillusionment, which is a study of privatization of an Estonian kolkhoz, Kanepi. But this said, I will give the floor to Jouko.
Yeah, welcome everybody also on my behalf, and thanks for Leo for organizing this event. So I will tell you a short history of the social distinction in modern Russian surveys. The background of these surveys was the comparative project Class Structure and Class Consciousness led by Erin Olli Wright. And it included 12 countries and was started in the early 80s. These Russian surveys had 4 waves: 1991, 1998, 2007, and 2015. And in a way, these surveys took place in the times of changes. In 1991, the socialism was about to vanish and central planning system was collapsing, and private enterprises had been growing already in late 80s. And in 98, there was a rapid change of society between 91 and 98, and they didn't meet the expectations of the most of the Russians. And as you remember, there was an economic crisis in August 98, and it meant that key economic institutions collapsed together with the half of all enterprises, and the small middle class was demoted to the level of simple reproduction. And in that point, most of the Russians lost their trust to political and social institutions and put their faith in Orthodox Church and army mainly. 2007 was a different case. Then Russia had enjoyed 6 years of economic growth and many important institutional reforms had been done, such as taxation law and strengthening of courts. And the early years of 2000s allowed also the emergence of new Russian middle class, which was something like 8% in 2007. But beyond rising living standards, there was a little change in the class structure, with all basic indicators had remained virtually unchanged with 1990s. At that point, the trust of population to major political institutions had resumed, especially president, but interest to any social or political activity had remained very low level. And the last survey, 2015, Russia was facing economic stagnation and increasing uncertain future in terms of economy and politics. And majority of Russians were not favoring any return to liberal strategy of reforms, and they didn't had such interest or empathy to oil and gas empire, and the government response has been a gradual reduction of government expenditure, victimizing especially education, healthcare, and welfare. So these are kind of a short background information. These surveys had sample sizes of 2,000 and something in 1991, 98, and 2007, but in this latest survey, 2015, we had 5,300 respondents. And in all surveys, the age limit was similar. It was between 18 and 75. And the sampling was done by strict random probability methods. And there was no quota sampling. So it was very strict methods of collection of data. And all waves had some common themes. First of all, work and work situation, autonomy, decision making, and supervision. The second key area was economic well-being, sources of income, expenses, changes in the past in terms of economy and expectation of the future, and benefits, private and public, what they got and what they expected to have in the future. Third element was social activism, participation of varied activities, membership in trade unions, parties, and social organizations. And fourthly, kind of a mental climate, which included questions of trust to public and private institutions, their views on welfare, and opinions about factors of social mobility, and opinions about who should organize most of the social welfare activities like education and childcare and healthcare and that kind of things. And the basic of our analysis has been kind of a scope logic or class analysis, which I had a picture of it, but you can't see it. It starts from simple classification of classes, class positions, what is your occupation and education and so forth. And the second level is class situation, where there are questions about structuration of working conditions, what kind of work is and how you see it. Is it heavy, easy, stressful, and so forth. And reproduction situation, social mobility, and demographic identities. Third level is this consciousness and organization, intended and unintended effects of class culture, participation of organizations, ability and willingness to take action. And finally, the highest level is the question of classes and formation of social factors, classes and state, classes and structuration of civil society, and so forth. So that was the background. Thank you. Leo doesn't have his mic open. Leo, open your mic.
No. Thank you, Jouko. And we go directly to Mikhail Chernysh, who will talk about social distinction and social mobility in contemporary Russia. So the main topic of the book. In fact, I can show the book. It's here. Yeah. So Mikhail Chernysh is a professor, the first deputy director of the Federal Center of Theoretical and Applied Sociology of the Russian Academy of Sciences, Moscow. His research interests revolve around social structure, mobility, social justice, and social institutions. He is author of, for example, Social Institutions and Mobility in Contemporary Russia from 2005, and The Coming of the Managerial Class in Russian Society, year 2000. Mikhail has made a long time cooperation with researchers in Helsinki, many more also too, but I don't know if you were from the beginning in this planning of this service, this first service, or did you come later with us? But the floor is yours, Mikhail.
Thank you. Thank you. I'd like to add to what Jouko has just said, that we have published 2 more books, actually. Each of the waves of the study resulted in a book. One of them was The Restoration of Class Society, with a question mark at the end. Jouko, do you remember that? And then there was another book which was also on class and class distinctions in Russia, which was published after the survey of 2007. So this is this book was in long preparation, we might say. We've been working on the study and trying to sum up what is happening in contemporary Russia, what are the main tendencies that are so important for Russia's development. I say that one of the issues that was of major interest to all of us was the becoming of the middle class in contemporary Russian society. After all, it's very well known that Russian society is a divided society, a society of inequality. The level of inequality is very high, much higher than not only in Finland, but also in other countries with a more liberal economy such as the United States. So the inequality is can only be overcome by the creation, we might say, or by the emergence of the major middle class, which we expected to come to be as a result of economic development and transformation of the Russian economy. And that happened. There was a number of articles in all of the books that we have written dedicated specifically to the middle class and its becoming. But meanwhile, while we were exploring the middle class in the Russian society, we were also becoming more and more immersed into the issues of what the middle class is. Like Markku Sippola, who talked about the middle class, emphasized the existence of the so-called quasi-middle class in Russian society. These are teachers, doctors, and others who deserve to be paid better, but who have low wages and who cannot qualify as middle class at present. So the mobility, there is a discrepancy inside the social structure in Russia between various dimensions, the dimension of pay and the dimension of employment, the dimension of application, and dimension of consciousness, when someone is aware of his or her belonging to the middle class, but at the same time cannot claim to be the middle class for obvious reasons, because they are living on a shoestring, actually, which is happening even now. I would like to say that in contemporary Russia, the median salary is about 26,000 rubles. And this is what is reported by the Rosstat, by the Russian Statistical Agency. This is not what we have come about. This is not the figure that we've devised. This is the official state agency that is reporting that figure, and about 40% of the population are getting a salary even lower than that. And what is 26,000 rubles? This is 300 euros. So this is more than half of the population of the Russian Federation get a salary that is smaller than 300 euros. So this is the problem of contemporary Russia. We are not growing in that respect. There are some factors that are preventing us from raising the living standards of the people, from giving a boost to social mobility in Russia. And one of these factors that is playing a role in all of this is that the middle class is actually a social group that has a limitation inside the structural characteristics of economy. For instance, if you want to have a middle class, your economic structure should be such and such. It should be, there should be more jobs that are well paid, that require skills that are well paid, that are modern, and so on and so forth. And this is very well recognized and accepted by the Russian leadership. If you remember, some of you might remember, that Mr. Putin once said that we need 25 million jobs that are qualified, jobs that require high skills. And we shall do it, he said, in the next decade. We shall create all those 25 million jobs, and that will be our middle class. Our middle class will be boosted by the creation of new industries, of new jobs that require high skills, all of that, so that the social mobility will be boosted by that. However, this has not happened, and we are still where we were a decade ago. There isn't much change in what the middle class is. But then there is one more thing, one more aspect of social mobility that I'd like to draw your attention to. And for that, I shall probably require to show some of the slides, if it is possible. Just a moment. So the slides show that we have developed the so-called consumption middle class in the Russian Federation. It mostly consists of people that have relatively good salaries by Russian standards. The consumption middle class doesn't consist of those who have high skills only, but it also consists of people who don't have any skills but earn some money. So the consumption middle class is mostly related to the structure of economy in the Russian Federation. Particularly, it's related to the raw material production in the Russian Federation. In this or that respect, it is connected with that sphere of production. But there is one more part of the middle class that is becoming stronger and stronger, and this is the middle class that is in state employment. This is law enforcement agencies that keep raising salaries of those who work for them. This is the government employees, the bureaucracies that get higher and higher salaries. These are other employees of the state that can also rely on having higher salaries, much more than those who are employed in other industries, in other parts of the economy. So this is those in the service of the state keep on becoming more numerous inside the middle class. And while we are seeing that tendency, we ask a key question. What is the Russian middle class? Is it truly the middle class that we would like to have? Or is it the white collar? The white collar is the definition of the group that was provided by Charles Wright Mills. You remember his book about white collar. What he meant by white collar is that the bureaucratization and routinization of life in a society, he actually meant the American society of his days, is creating a white collar workers with a very distinct social character and a very distinct attitude to the state and other matters. It also provides for the reunification of society and routinization of things that are happening in society. The middle class is losing what he said is independence. It's losing its impact on other social groups as a true agent, and is becoming more of a group that is towing the line. So this is the tendency that we are also observing in contemporary Russian society. The middle class is becoming more dependent on the state, on job provision by the state, on salaries that are provided by the state. And that is creating a very specific situation of social mobility, the mobility into the state sector that on the one hand provides stability to those who are employed by the state, but on the other hand, they are also losing their independence. Well, and here is a slide that is based on the data of the study that we are now discussing, and this is the middle class autonomy tendencies. As you see, this is the mean autonomy index based on the 6 questions that we posed to our respondents each time we conducted our survey. And as you see, the level of autonomy is going down. So the people are becoming, the so-called middle class is becoming less autonomous. And then this is another illustration of what is happening. It's decline of the middle class decision-making power. So they are actually not having less and less impact on the process of decision making on their enterprises. And that also means that they develop a social character. If we use Charles Mill's metaphor, the social character that prevents them from having an impact on what is happening in society in general. So this is the main problem of contemporary Russian social structure, the problem of the middle class, not only numerically but also its nature and its internal structure. This is one of the problems that we have. And with that, I'd like to finish. I think that I've used all my time.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mikhail. We can continue in discussing this more, but now we have, Julia and Markku. I don't know, is it okay that Julia is presenting first now? Julia Epikhina is talking about employment precarity in Russian society. This is something what I heard has been quite large discussion in Russia, which is interesting to hear about it and the results on this case. Julia is candidate in the Sociological Sciences Institute of Sociology at the Russian Academy of Sciences, Moscow. Her special interest includes sociology of professions and professional groups, social stratification, and social mobility patterns. Please take the floor.
Yeah. The employment precarity is the topic of my chapter in our monograph. And this topic became some challenge for me. And when I wrote my part, I wanted to understand some things about precarity and about sociology. And I wanted to understand what does precarity mean for sociology, why it became so popular the last years, and how is it related to the notion of a social class, and what is the situation with employment precarity in Russian society. And so first of all, I considered different theoretical approaches to the notion of employment. And after that, I made two conclusions. And the first of it, that the type of employment can produce social and class differences. And two of them are job security or job stability and social guarantees. And the second, that precarity is some kind of, that precarity is formed within the relationships between an employer and employee. And so it is some kind of quality of such relationships. And so these conclusions, these statements became the base of operationalization of employment precarity. And I choose two types of things, of different features of employment to operationalize precarity. And the first, job security, is operationalized by the type of employment. And so the precarity is linked to non-traditional employment. It means that precarity arises when employees work don't work full time. And so here on this diagram, you can see how the share of employees with non-traditional employment changes over time over 3 waves of our research. And so we can see that there isn't big changes. We can see that the share of such employees in always is almost the same, about 20%. And the second type of operationalization is based on social guarantees, of compliance with the social guarantees and labor rights. And so we can see on the left part, we can see the main social guarantees, and it is work week duration, wage guarantees, paid vacation, sick leave, and union membership. And 3 waves of research include data on almost all criteria, and there is only one exception. It is wage guarantees. We have data by this criteria only in the data of 1998 and 2007. And then if we consider the precarity is the quality, then we can measure it. We can measure its degree, its amount by the number of symptoms. And so on the left part, we can see how the situation with employment precarity in Russia changes over time. And so we can see that no symptoms, no precarity coincides with the time of economic crisis. And we can see that the degree of precarity can change over time. And then I consider precarity as a class feature, and precarity can be considered as a class feature. And my main hypothesis was that classes of upper level had less precarity than lower classes. And now on the right part, we can see how the average number of precarity symptoms changes by over time and by different classes. And we can see that in the years of economic crisis, the class of unskilled workers had significantly more average of number of precarity symptoms. It means that these classes have more influence of destruction of economic crisis. And so main conclusion of my part is precarity is the quality of employment which can change over time. And it is linked to economic conditions. And in Russia, precarity and the share of employment precarity increases in the period of crisis. And it can be considered as a class feature, and which is manifested for lower classes, first of all. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Julia. Thank you for very intensive and well in schedule kept presentation with a lot of information. And then we have Markku Sippola as the last presenter here, and he is talking about the role of the state and Russian people's attitudes towards the welfare state. Welfare state is a topic which is discussed quite much in the book, also in several chapters. So just to mention. So, but Markku Sippola, he's a senior lecturer in the Faculty of Social Sciences, University of Helsinki. His research interests include industrial relations, migration, and social policy in the Baltic, Nordic, and Russian context. Take the floor, please, Markku.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to be here, and this is actually maybe the first time I'm presenting something on the basis of this book chapter. So I'm alone here, but we are two writers, two authors for this chapter. The other one is from the University of Tampere, and her name is Katri Maria Järvinen. And she was responsible for the statistical analysis for this study. But now let's take a look towards these people's attitudes towards the welfare states. Actually, we did a long journey, taking different perspectives to this class issue and about the welfare state opinions among Russians on the basis of this SDMR survey. But we chose finally and eventually this Roosma et al. Their analysis as a framework. And their analysis consists of, it's based on European Social Survey, the questions on European Social Survey, which is a questionnaire or survey of 22 different countries in Europe. And that was, for our purposes, it was excellent because it has a dynamic perspective. It has this not only the it doesn't cover only the issue of how the things are currently, but it also covers the perspective how the things should be, and it's also good for unveiling the legitimacy of the welfare state, and also it is interesting for policymakers to uncover what are the views of people, how they would like that things would have been. Also, this is some kind of comparison between different regimes of the welfare state. It is a famous study by Gösta Esping Andersen about the welfare regimes, and they are such as Scandinavian or social democratic welfare regime. There is this Mediterranean and also the continental welfare regimes and so on. And the newest one is an addition to that is this post-communist regime. So they have a different emphases in different regimes as regards the attitude towards the provisions of the welfare state and the expected features of the welfare state. We have a kind of hypothesis that the Russian situation might resemble the post-communist regime in that respect, and also since because of the legacy of the Soviet Union, there might be some legacies of or resemblances with this social democratic universal welfare state regime. So some very general ideas about these social policy developments lately, and it has been a largely neglected area of policy in Russia after the collapse of the Soviet Union. It is not only the future of Russia only, but it's also the case in most of the post-socialist countries. There are some estimates that it's an inadequate, unpopular, and uneven social system of social provision. There is also a very low-level spending on social policy governmental programs. And also one development is interesting, that is from the universal welfare state towards means-tested social benefits. This means that they are not necessarily anymore provided by the state or some official institution, but they are some earmarked provisions or money to special needs, to people having special needs. And there are also, of course, huge or big regional disparities in financial resources of this social policy. So our study was, we have a different or two dependent variables. One of these is this preferred role. People's support for the role of the government in social policy areas. It is kind of, do they prefer that the social provisions should be met by with the government, or government should be responsible in this, or should it be people's own responsibility, or private companies, or so on? Then the perceived performance. These respondents have been asked to evaluate the different outcomes of different policy areas concerning healthcare, education system, local social services. And also there are some background variables like gender, age, education, labor market position, subjective income. That means they have estimated themselves what is their income, and egalitarianism. It means that how they value that the society should be equal. There are some questions about that in that survey. Okay, but my colleague was responsible for the statistical analysis. I cannot answer to that very much, but let's see what happens. We have such a fourfold that consists of these groups or different clusters. If a person prefers that governments should be in charge of social provisions, then the preferred role, this is strong. But if they think government should not be responsible for this, the preferred role is weak. Then perceived performance. If a person thinks that the social policy doesn't work very well, so it's bad, but if he or she thinks it performs well, it is good. So we have these kind of clusters, and they have some class connotations or class features that are related to these different clusters. For example, overall positive people tend to be well off quite much. Performers critical, they might have some egalitarian values and left-wing ideology, but less income. Role critical ones are mostly in higher positions, and they have a good incomes, and they might have some right-wing ideological thoughts. Overcritical people have lower incomes, but they might have and they might have left-wing aspirations and so on. What is remarkable in Russia is that, first of all, we came into conclusion that there is not very big difference between Russia and these European social survey countries in terms of these clusters. There is the biggest group of performance critical people in this survey, which is a little bit less than in these Mediterranean and post-communist regimes in general. But then when it comes to role critical and overall critical people, these are also similar. These proportions are similar to these post-communist and Mediterranean countries, but they are slightly more in these groups. So they think that the Russian people tend to think more that the state should not be in charge of social policy measures. Do I have some time? We have some differences with this Roosma and al.'s survey or their results. For example, this third one, the role critical group, we did not understand, or this is not understandable very well, that those who are at school, who are retired, or are in other not well-off group, they are role critical. That means that they think that state does not need to take charge of that much charge of these social provisions. They also think that that this state performs quite well. So it's interesting. It's very controversial group. And then let's go to the conclusions. As I said, the proportions in these clusters pretty much are similar to these previous studies. There are some slight differences. There is this high presence of performance critical opinions typical in the Mediterranean and post-communist welfare regimes. There's also a political message that large groups of those who perceive the performance of the welfare state and the role of the government as a welfare state provider as bad. So there are a lot of unsatisfied or dissatisfied people. They do not regard either the role of the state as good or the performance of the social policy instruments, or both, very good. And also we cannot recognize any certain profiles that fall in with these clusters. And so our conclusion is that it is like a mass of people. The Russians are a mass of people. They do not share any common agenda towards the welfare state, the institutions and phenomena of welfare state. There is no classification or class ideology or whatever in that sense. That's all. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Markku. And now we are turning to discussant role. I'm very happy that we have Jouko Nikula here as a discussant. I learned to know him as in the staff of Institute of Sociology in Helsinki, but in fact he is Professor Emeritus of Sociology from Uppsala University. So he made quite a big, long day in Uppsala. And he specialized in how to interpret it, right, sociology of consumption or taste, but he is an expert in sociological theories and among others on these theories on consumption studies. He has written among a lot, and also one book which is Sociology of Taste from 1997. But I think some of participants remember well his book about Stalinist Soviet with the title Caviar with Champagne, Common Luxury and the Ideals of the Good Life in Stalin's Russia from 2003. Take the floor, please, Jukka.
Yeah, thank you very much for the invitation to be discussing this interesting seminar. I have written down my comment more or less in order to try to keep within the time limits, which are limited here. So otherwise I would probably talk too much and too long. The book is an interesting collection. The book we are here launching or discussing is an interesting collection of articles on various topics around the social distinctions in contemporary Russia. And we have heard today some presentations of some of the topics and some of the chapters based on some of the chapters, but it's much wider in its topics and much richer, and includes many interesting observations and results as well. The questions of poverty, the precariety in the labor market, home ownership, as well as the attitudes to the welfare state figure among the topics analyzed in the book. To me, for instance, the fact that home ownership is very widely spread in Russia was almost a revelation. Is Russia, after all, the promised land of people's capitalism, if it would take this as a face value, so to say, the result? One wonders what might be its wider social consequences, which are taken up in the book to some extent, but it would be an interesting topic to study further, because let's say that kind of a people as proprietors of owners are, of course, one of the basic aspects of many ideas of the middle class, that they have something that they have some resources, some assets, so to say, to employ. And as it shows out in Russia, they, of course, those assets are quite limited in many cases related to home ownership. The same is true of the rather contradictory nature of the Russian labor market. On the other hand, the great majority works under rather stable and relatively long-term full-time labor contracts. And in this sense, the precariat is quite small in Russia. And people mostly work shorter, not longer, but not shorter hours than officially agreed. But on the other hand, many do not get any compensation for their sick leaves and there are no paid holidays, for instance. The degree of trade union organization is low and so forth. So it is some of, in a way, that kind of contradictory features in many cases analyzed here. The common thread that runs through most of the writings is the question, or almost the mystery, of the middle class, as already pointed out here in the Chernysh presentation here as well. So I shall dedicate my main comments to this question, this analysis of the middle class in the book within the time limits allowed to me here. Is there a middle class in Russia? What is the answer given to this question in the book? The authors follow in the footsteps of Uli Wright and his famous international research project on social class. As we know, as it came out here already earlier, that the editors and some of the authors of the book have been members of Wright's project from the beginning, almost from the beginning as well. Whether or not one belongs to the middle class depends in this conceptual, according to this conceptual framework, on three factors, mainly on three factors: the level of the living standards of consumption, the level of education, and finally, one's position in the work organization. that is, one's degree of autonomy and decision-making capacity. The last of these factors is the variety and peculiarity, as we know. The core of the middle class, as already pointed out here as well earlier in the talks, the core of the middle class consists of people who have middling positions on all these variables. Those who qualify only on some of them fall into the margin of the middle class. As the results show, in Russia, about 1/4 belongs to the core of the middle class, slightly less to the margin. The share of both of these factors has increased since the 1990s, and the margin has grown a bit faster than the core. We could therefore conclude that Russia has indeed become a middle-class society. Taken together, the middle class is bigger than the whole of the working class today. It looks almost as Putin's old dream of making Russia a genuine middle-class society, with the majority of well-to-do citizens guaranteeing the stability of the society, has become true. Of course, we should remember that the data in the book and the last data are not quite up to date, naturally, in all sociological research. Of course, we always lack some years behind the current situation. And we can't expect it to reflect on the present situation in Russia directly. But certainly it's clarifying in that sense as well. At the same time, the behavior and attitudes of the Russian middle class look a bit odd in many respects, showing features of not typically associated with the more optimistic visions about the social role of the middle class. For instance, its socio-political opinions do not differ remarkably from working class. Its self-identification is rather weak. Well, this is certainly true in other countries as well, for instance, in Great Britain. And so it's not so exceptional, but anyway, one of the really interesting and somewhat surprising observations presented in the book is that, I quote here, the middle class is gradually being stripped of its influence on the decision-making process in their work organizations, that is, with the process of decision-making conferred to a higher level of authority. The same is true about their work autonomy at work, another decisive criteria of the variety and middle class. It would be interesting to know whether these developments are a peculiarity of the present-day Russia. This was already taken up also in Chernysh talk today. Let's say a consequence of increasing authoritarianism in the society at large. Or are they simply part of the worldwide neoliberal practice of governance, which transforms professional self-determination into self-control with very strict predetermined criteria of effective work performance, a process that is all too familiar to all of us working in the academic organizations today. I'm a retired person, but anyway, I was still active when it all started here as well. The new governance system in state organization, including the academia. It is interesting if one can find this ideology all over the world, including Russia. Well, as already mentioned, there's another Russian peculiarity that, at least partly a Russian peculiarity, that the members of the state security forces are becoming an increasing part of the middle class. If I remember correctly, I read somewhere that at least 1,200,000 members belong to the police and various state security forces nowadays in Russia. And as we know, they have been prenumerated quite well recently. Their salaries have been raised quite recently, as already mentioned as well earlier today. So this is certainly quite a bit of peculiar feature in the sense. And as quite a lot of the members of the Russian middle class work in the state sector in general as well, which is not so different from what's going on in the Nordic countries, for instance, where that kind of state sector welfare, state services are quite dominant among the middle class as well. Now, as we can see, there are all kinds of interesting observations and results in the study that partly seem to be, if not contradicting each other, but at least pointing to different directions. But when we are discussing those overall consequences of all this, what that might mean to the let's say, the social stability and social well-being of people and social stability and so forth in the society. With hopes often associated with the middle class, the growing role of the middle class in the society. Actually, my main critical point or questions concerns the usefulness of the what I would call the classificatory class theory in analyzing the Russian society, or any other modern society for that matter. The concept of the middle class has obvious political ideological relevance and appeal, and it has been the object of several studies and polemics as well in Russia, as shown in the book. Therefore, this is all the reason to take it seriously under critical reflection. But in my opinion, it would be fruitful to offer more or experiment with some kind of a bit alternative approaches to analyze of the social structure in Russia, mapping out, speaking now in the Bourdieusian language, of course, all kinds of social and cultural distinctions, economic, cultural, and social, as well as symbolic or status distinctions, identifying their similarities, parities, and disparities, correlations between them, and contradictions between them, so forth, rather than trying to, so to say, classify people in that kind of groups of people using definite criteria. Statistical groups of people using definite criteria, so to say. And I think this was also taken up earlier, this box as well, but a bit more than it comes up. As I read the book, it's not so clearly pointed out or discussed in the book, that kind of approaches. And it might be more interesting to see how those kind of discrepancies that, as mentioned already, that there are very, very educated people who are very poorly paid, and for instance, that there are people who might be in work positions with very much autonomy and so forth, and with other respects are not at all. Their cultural, they could be totally, let's say, working class and so forth. So this is just a suggestion that I leave for the further consideration, for your further consideration, and perhaps to be thought about in the future studies. I hope there will be more future studies as well on these topics. This said, I have to admit that one of the great merits of this work is that it makes effective use of 4 original surveys with more or less similar questionnaires covering over 30 years of modern Russian history. This is quite exceptional, as we know, in sociological research, that we have such data sets, quite big systematically collected data sets covering so long periods of time. And of course, this also is in favor of the point that it's good that you have kept up more or less the same conceptual framework in conducting the studies. Otherwise, it would be so possible to compare the different time periods, of course. But there's one thing that I was lacking in the book, which I think it's quite a serious shortcoming, a technical shortcoming. I didn't find anywhere presentation or explication of the technical conduct of the surveys, their questionnaires, sampling methods, representativeness, whether they relied on personal interviews or mail questionnaires, response rates, etc., which are part of that kind of research reports usually, of course. The book would have benefited a lot from kind of appendix, having that kind of material in it. I mean, not all the chapters rely on the same data sets, at least not completely, or not to a great part, but many do. And without such standard information, it is quite difficult for the reader to evaluate the reliability and the validity of the results. But this said, I found it really interesting reading, and it gave me lots of new information and ideas about the Russian development of Russian society during most of the time of the existence of the state, so post-socialist Russia. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jukka. There was a lot of interesting questions and topics, and and we certainly gave the presenters possibility to reflect some. But now I would like to just mention and present that I see that in the audience we have two more authors participating. Marina Khmelnitskaya, who was co-writing on poverty, on housing and middle class, and Simo Mannila, who was writing about poverty and confidence in Russia. So if they want to add something, it would be welcome. And then I would like to take some questions from the audience now. So if you want to ask, make a question or point, so raise your hand, your real hand like this. I try to find, you are quite many, and we try this method now. So please open your video and raise your hand. And then if there is anybody, I would like to take a couple of, I have 2 pages, so, yeah, so I don't see anybody reacting right now. No. How about Simo or Marina? Would you like to come in with some words? Or maybe not now. Okay, then we go. We take a round among presenters, and yeah, at least this survey method. I think I have heard Mikhail present very good overall picture on the survey method. Do you want to take a short presentation here?
Yes, as has been said, the survey is conducted on the basis of a random sample. We've done several times the description of the sample. I think it's somewhere in the book. It should be there. At least Jouko included some part of the description of the sample into the book. I don't remember where it could be, but each time we conducted a sample of the entire Russian population from the age of 18 to the age of 65. The method of the study was a face-to-face interview. The sampling was stratified, that is to say, we divided the entire population into strata, and the strata consisted in the types of settlement that was used as a study, and within each of the settlement we also used the region as the primary sampling unit. In each of the primary sampling units, we chose respondents randomly by guiding our interviewers, randomly choosing households, and inside the household in each time we chose randomly an adult person who on the basis of the Kish method, or in other cases on the basis of the date of birth, which is also randomly distributed, date of birth, the latest date of birth, which was also a measure of randomness in this case. So the entire sample was random, and each time we got the entire Russian population into it. The first level of division was the probability proportionate to size allocated to each of the federal districts of the Russian Federation. There are 6 of them, as you know, and they are differently populated. Some of them are densely populated, but others are not so densely populated. So first of all, we used the principle of probability proportional to size. And within each of these districts, we were building our strata. And within that each strata, we were also choosing our respondents as I said, randomly. So this is a verbal description of the sample that should be, of course, followed up by a written description, which is there. Jouko knows that we've done it several times. There was an entire report which was attached to the report on the data. There was an entire report on how we conducted the sampling in the Russian Federation, which was not easy, of course. But we also reported all the other things that were, we were also reporting things that were supposedly should be reported in each case, and this is the refusal rate and non-accessibility. These are all things that are contained in the report on the sample. Maybe that's all that I can say now.
Thank you. Now I see Marina Melnitskaya has her hand up, so so you are the first, the next now.
Yes, hello. Hello.
Do you have
hear me,
video?
right? Yeah, hi. Yeah, I tried to raise my virtual hand, but it's nice that you noticed. I'm not sure I can put the video on because I tried before, but I think I have a similar issue as Jouko Nikula had in the beginning. So, but in any case, thank you very much. I mean, the discussion was really interesting, and you know, even though I'm a participant of this book, it was really interesting to listen how the authors presented their chapters, and you somehow come to realize the issues from a different perspective when you listen to them like this. So thank you very much for having this this seminar. I wanted to ask a question actually, which somehow perplexes me when I was thinking and when we were writing this chapter. As a matter of fact, there is another co-author of a book chapter from this book, which is taking part, which is my my colleague Alexandra Burdyak, or Lesia Burdyak, so she's there. I don't know if she wants to add anything, but in any case, the question which I had to the other participants is this. Strangely, and I think it's probably what the discussant and also some of the presenters pointed and spoke about, it's this contradictory nature of the Russian middle class. So just looking at housing, as a matter of fact, Russian middle class does not appear to be so state dependent as perhaps other data may suggest. As a matter of fact, people buy their own housing, they take out mortgage loans, they build their own housing, and they expect very little from the state. It's less than 1% of those people who are thinking of improving their housing expect to receive something from the state. So in a sense, they're very market driven and very little state dependent as far as the actual behavior in the housing sphere is concerned. And yet they themselves say that it's the state who should be responsible for providing, for instance, housing services. And it's an overwhelming number of respondents who say that it's the state should be providing housing services, like 95% in all three waves. So for me, this is a remarkable contradiction. And to be honest, I do not have an answer, even though I've written this chapter in the book. So if anybody can take up and explain what they think could be going on, apart from just simply stating that this is very contradictory. So yeah, I just wonder, would be great to hear your opinion. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody who wants to reflect on this? Right. Jukka. Open your mouth.
I certainly don't have any answer to explain the contradiction that you pointed out, but it's extremely interesting, I think, and I think it would be very valuable. I don't know if I'm not an expert on this field, and I haven't seen any studies or not read any study, but it was very interesting to know studies about the home ownership in Russia in general, about mortgage loans and so forth. And there must be huge differences, as I think you point out in your chapter as well, between different regions. And sometimes in some parts of the country, I suppose it's more a burden to be a house owner than an asset. Whereas in some parts of Moscow, you probably are extremely rich if you have a nice apartment somewhere. So it must be huge differences, which is true about other aspects as well, yeah, in that kind of regional, which is pointed out in the book, but not so much analyzed in detail. I mean, that the regional differences in other respects as well, social differences and distinctions in that sense as well. But that would be, well, I would be very interested to know if there are any other studies about the home ownership in Russia and its consequences, what it means really.
Thank you. Now, I don't know your name, but you don't have SSHME.
SSHME is Harri Melin.
Harri Melin. I see you. Yes.
I have been participating in the process since the very beginning. I have two notions. We have the first data set actually is from 1988, and that was when the Soviet Union was still existing, and we collected together with Mikhail Chernysh and his colleagues our first data from the Soviet Union in 1988. And when it comes to the sampling and representativeness of the data, it's really peculiar because the sampling was based on so-called typical cases, and there were, for example, city of Yerevan was part of our sample, and most of the respondents had PhD, and that was because the data was gathered from the Yerevan University and the local institute of the Science Academy of Soviet Union. And the results was quite peculiar because they were coming from university people. Nizhny Tagil was represented by a military factory, and Voronezh was represented by a textile factory. But there were no distinction because the Soviet Union was so homogeneous society at that time. And then the second data from the early 90s, which was gathered by Eric Wright and his colleagues from United States, was not so reliable because there were still great problems within the Soviet sociological or Russian sociological, actually it was the Soviet sociological community to collect data and carry out representative surveys. But since 1998 onwards, the data sets that we have gathered has been really good data sets, and they are representing a nice continuity or continuum of social change in Russia, but we can trace out our analyses back to late 80s. This was first notion. The second notion is dealing with home ownership, that when Soviet Union collapsed, people get vouchers of the former Soviet companies, and that was more or less stolen by oligarchs. But what remained was that the most valuable asset that most of the Soviet people got after the collapse was their house, their home, whether it was a condo in the city areas or a house in the rural areas. But that was the beginning of the Russian home ownership, and the real estate markets has developed far later than that. But that was really the beginning of the home ownership, was the homes that people inherited them more or less from the former state or former Soviet companies. Thank you.
Thank you. I would like to add to this housing that there is another effect when they became homeowners, that the flat owners, they had to, I understood it was obligatory to form a association to take care of these houses together, so a kind of civil society related system, but obligatory. So I think this is also a question which may have interesting effects on Russian society. And then Mikhail. Yes.
I'd like just to add a few words to the home ownership issue. Actually, most Russian citizens were forced into ownership. It's not that they got it as a benefit. They were forced into ownership because the entire Russian housing was privatized. And that was, the idea behind it was that, well, the privatization was fraudulent, but the population should get something tangible, something palpable. And this is their own apartment. That's what they got. But after that, after a while, there were a number of changes that made it not an asset, but a burden for many Russians. First of all, the housing reforms that that forced each of the housing, each of the condos, to create, to sign up to an organization that provided services for it. And that was a private organization. The entire service area servicing these housing, providing gas, electricity, hot water, etc. It was commercialized. And obviously the prices spiked immediately. And nowadays, the housing cost in some areas may sometimes be equal to the size of a pension that a Russian can get. And this is, of course, too much. It's one issue. The other issue is that the housing is becoming aged and the communications are also worn down. But the state is not contributing anything to the renovation of that communication area. It says that since you are owners, you should contribute yourself to the capital renovation of your own housing. And that means in some areas like Moscow, we pay an addition to housing costs for the capital renovation of the infrastructure. But in other areas where the population is poor, they don't have the money, and so they rely on this unreliable infrastructure that breaks down on a regular basis. So if you read the papers, you can always see that here or there, the infrastructure broke down, the electricity is gone, the hot water is no longer supplied, or even the cold water is no longer supplied. So this is the problem of housing. The population that is poor on the one hand, on the other hand, commercialization of the entire area of housing. That's it.
Thank you. Who wants to contribute? I would like to ask Markku about this welfare problematics. Is it to interpret so that Russia is a normal state? It's a normal European state. It seemed to be quite near these attitudes.
Yeah,
to other countries.
Yeah, I think if you compare to the results of Roosma et al. Others, this there are no big differences in the proportions of which fall into the different clusters in this fourfold. And I think in that sense, it's compared to, for example, this post-communist regime doesn't make a big difference. Compared to Mediterranean country regime, it doesn't make a big difference. But there's also this notion that I made is that when in other countries, like in Western Europe, in Scandinavian countries, there are kind of clearer profiles who belong to certain clusters, who are, for example, role critical ones. In Russia, it's much more mixed picture. So the question is this the whole population one class only? There aren't any class distinctions in that sense. Or is there something else in this we cannot explain? And also in the end of our chapter, I would mention that there is this cultural, how did we put it? But I think in understanding the class issue in Russia, there is this Buddhism kind of cultural distinctions and that kind of stuff instead of this materialistic understanding of class issue. I don't know, but this might be a way forward to understand. That is my point.
Thank you. Now Kirill Polkov has asked to talk. Yeah, please.
Yes. Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, thank you very much for this interesting presentation. I have a question that is maybe not directly to the book, but I would like to hear your opinion about this. Sergei Guriev, one of the Russian economists in exile, he was theorizing recently about the kind of relationship between the authorities and the people, and he said that Russians, so the sort of emerging middle class, are making claims to authorities that these authorities cannot satisfy, and as a result, these Russians, this emerging middle class, is forced to leave Russia. And I'm wondering, is it possible to say that the authorities are not, in a way, interested in creating the middle class as their target constituency? Or is this, yeah, I'm just interested in how is it possible to interpret this claim? If you have
Thank you.
opinions. Thank you.
Who wants to take this question? Jouko, would you like to say something to this?
I might, but I think that I'm not that good expert. I would bet that Mikhail has more enlightened view on this matter. So
Mikhail, would you like?
I think that I believe that it's making us address the way of thinking of the Russian rulers. I mean, that's something that we don't know what they're thinking, what they're thinking about the middle class and how they relate to the middle class, and this is their attitude to the middle class. It's hard to guess, actually. I don't know how Sergei Guriev, he's actually doing a guesswork that they are not interested in the middle class, that they are sending the middle class away. I think that the middle class is, at least part of it is leaving Russia, that's for sure, but not all of it. There is very little chance for most of the Russian middle class of emigrating, particularly now in the times of COVID and in the times of crisis, not only in Russia, but also in other countries. Everybody realizes that is aware of that the crisis is global. And only a small crust of the middle class, the top crust, top specialists, have hopes attached to immigration now. So I don't think that the tendency that he's talking about is affecting the core of the middle class a lot. But one thing that he is probably right about is that the middle class is dissatisfied. There are lots of representatives of that group who think that that society is not doing well, and that the country is not doing well, and the middle class. And this is a theoretical issue, and I don't want to go into it. And we all know that the middle class has its own set of values and hopes. And one of those values that middle class is related to the idea of progress and economic development and individuation and other things that are regarded by many as progress. And that's, if nothing happens in those areas, then the middle class becomes dissatisfied. And of course, and it gets repressed in some parts of it, and the dissatisfaction grows. This is certainly right, but otherwise I don't believe that there is a mass outflow of the middle class from Russia into other countries. Only the top skilled specialists can afford to go to other countries and rely on having a job there. Thanks.
And now Julia has asked, and then the next is Marina. Please, Julia, open your microphone.
I would add some comments to Michael. And I think that in Russia there are two types of middle class. And the first of them is ideological project. And the second one is the research term and something that researcher measure, investigate, and so on. And if we discuss the middle class as the ideological project, is true that there was a plan to create middle class, the Russian middle class, loyal to the Russian authority. But this project finished in 2011-2012 on Bolotnaya Square. And since the middle class is the ideological project isn't interested for Russian authority. It is only research topic of Russian sociology.
Yes. Thank you. And Marina? Marina, hello.
Yes, hello.
Okay.
Thank you. Sorry, only if I do not take time from the other participants, but I just wanted to comment a little bit again on the nature of the relationship between the middle class and housing ownership. Well, as a matter of fact, I'm not a sociologist, I'm a political scientist. So when I started thinking of that chapter, I was thinking through the sort of lens of the government policy towards housing. However, as we spoke, and also my co-author sort of pointed out to me that the way we wrote the chapter, we certainly did not assume that housing ownership is necessarily immediately a feature of the middle class. So indeed, housing ownership in Russia is staggeringly high, but it's also high in the post-socialist, in the entire of the post-socialist space, and they even call it super home ownership. So that's certainly not a feature of the middle class. However, we felt that the behavior, the active behavior towards housing, and that's what our study shows, is a feature of the middle class, or at least they show much more active behavior in terms of, for instance, taking out mortgages and buying housing. So that can be attributed, and that's why I asked my question: how people who are in a sense, quite active in the housing sphere can be still saying that they would prefer the state to be responsible for certain services. But okay, it's perhaps that requires some deep research into that question, because I'm still puzzled by it. However, what Lesia just also pointed out to me, that high home ownership, as a matter of fact, can be an obstacle to the development of the middle class, particularly given the price disparity of housing between different regions. So for instance, if salaries and living standards are much higher in Moscow, people from remote regions are struggling moving to Moscow, where they could have had higher salaries, given how expensive housing is in Moscow and how little they can get by selling the property which they have elsewhere. So in a sense, high home ownership is impeding the kind of extension of the middle class in that sense, and as far as the housing sphere is concerned. So that's just the point I wanted to add.
Thank you. I see Alexandra Burdiak. Did you want to talk, or would you maybe present yourself, because you were co-writer?
I can present myself. My name is Alexandra Burdiak. I work in RANEPA in Institute for Social Analysis in Moscow. And I made all calculations in our chapter on housing. And I want to thank Jouko Nikula for variables of classes in all waves. It was very useful to compare the attitude of middle class and other strata to housing in our survey, SDMR. Thank you.
Thank you. It seems that we are nearing the end of this session. Is there still some? Before we end, I would like to send regards and excuse from IRA's research leader, Anne-Marie Setre. She was going to participate, but because of the weather, she fell yesterday and she's under operation of her hand now, right now, so she's not participating. But we will record this, so she will listen it later on. Any contributes, remarks? In that case, I think I will close this session, and thank you all. This was quite an effort to get so many writers to Uppsala, but the new method, internet method, is wonderful in this case, and I think this is something we can learn also in continuation. Okay, so we are waiting maybe 10 years for the next book, or how does it go now? Are you going to continue, or do you decide it after 5 years? Mikhail and Jouko, have you a plan?
I think that we're hopeful.
Okay.
We're still hopeful that we can make another study of Russia in 7 years. This is the period that we marked as.
Next year is the 7th after.
The 7th year, yeah, but I don't know whether we'll be able to do it next year, but it's time for us to start planning.
Yeah.
But we hope.
Yeah, thank you very much. It was really, I can recommend everybody to reading this book. Every chapter has interesting issues and remarks and side remarks, and so this is really a good contribution to Russian research. So thank you very much. I close this session, and
there is a question.
We have another topic. Yeah, okay.
Did you see in the chat?
Chat, I don't.
Anders Troideson asks, do you generally include calculation of shadow sector of the economy when looking at the middle class? And we would like to answer that we don't, because it's so difficult to measure.
Yeah, the shadow sector, when we now continue, was question I was wondering how well I think that Julia's presentation that and chapter is maybe one where the question is actual if those workers who are not recorded who are informal workers, are they somehow included in the research? I guess most of them not. So what does it mean to the results? And is there some sector precariat which is not included in this kind of research, which is quite large in some regions at least? But I don't know if you have any comment on this, because maybe some of you have. Julia, do you have some comment on this?
I'm thinking about shadow sector. What does it mean if it is related to
Immigrants from Uzbekistan who are working in a factory without any papers?
No, because it contradicts with the model of sampling, and only Russian citizens participate as respondents in our research, and so we didn't touch anyway the part of economic which is related to migrants, and this if it means shadow sector. No, migrants and obstacle conditions related to them weren't the topic of our research.
Okay, thank you. So it's another problem to think about it.
Salaries in envelope. Yes, in the last way, in the research of 2015, we included the question about the color of wage, white, green, and black, about salaries. And so I think that the part of middle class which gets their salaries in envelope was included in the whole analysis of middle class.
Yeah, I mean, an explanation is envelopes means that you don't get it officially, and that you get it in an envelope directly from your employer, bypassing the process of paying taxes. So but that also means that your salary is not filling up your pension account, and no money goes to any pension account or to any of the social funds. This is the employer forces you to get that part of, because that lessens his or her responsibility towards the employees. This is part of the shadow economy, which we explored in the last wave of the study.
Yeah, that makes it complicated to compare with other nations and so, because the criteria may be varying. But okay, we have to leave this now for some other time. So thank you very much for participation.
Thank you very much. It was nice to see you, even if only on the screen.
May I ask a question to my Moscow colleagues? Did you get your paper copies of the book?
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Yes, we got the papers. Thank you for taking care. We got.
I didn't take care. I didn't get my book. That is what I'm asking. Yes. How did you do that?
It's Jouko Nikula sent it twice, I think.
Oh.
Or rather, Routledge sent it twice. First of all, they sent it, and then it didn't arrive. But then
So-
Jouko wrote another letter to Routledge, and they sent it another time. And
I'm afraid they didn't send it to me, Jouko. Can I ask you to check if the book is on the way?
Yeah,
Thank
I can
you.
write a third or fourth letter.
I don't know the number of the letter, but I would like to have one.
I will do it. I will do it.
Thank you very much.
You're
Thank you.
welcome. Bye-bye.
So, goodbye.
bye-bye.
Goodbye.
Bye.